Eli, what does being a great session player mean to you?
A great session player. I think being able to hear a song and have something that elevates it part-wise. And sometimes, that could be like something super simple. Most of the time, in my chair bass, most of the time it is pretty simple. But just having the wherewithal where if it's not simple, that you got some kind of places to go that are suitable to, genre or, the producer being able to read the room, being able to see what the artist is like, knowing their music. I guess it's ultimately a service industry, right? I mean, it's like people hire us to do a thing. Mm-hmm. It's being able to get the session to a closing point in a good way, I guess, ultimately, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Get to the other side where it's like we came here to accomplish this and we did,
Right. So in your younger years of being introduced to music and, getting excited about it, when did you start to recognize that there was actually like an occupation to be a musician that plays on records?
So I grew up in Nashville, and my dad had a recording service, which we still run, and he met a lot of players that way. And then he ended up on records himself, and I got to kind of hang out and go check out what he was up to and see the process. And I kind of grew up in his studio. So I knew the studio, I knew how to get around in it. And I just always thought the hang with the musicians and the artists and making that kind of stuff, art, music, whatever, was very appealing. Mm-hmm. It's really kind of just like home for me in a lot of ways. I've been in bands, I've, been part of a lot of cool recordings, but just being able to hang with the guys, make good music, talk about it, move quickly, that really intrigued me. I enjoyed the process of it a whole lot.
Gotcha. So was it like right off the bat when you were a kid, you're like, this is what I want to do? Or did you ever explore other options?
So I grew up I played in orchestra and then went to college for a year and pretty much decided that I was going to come back and go to Belmont, and maybe meet some people that way. But my dad had just moved the studio to Berry Hill. This is like 2003. And I was like, I'll just go take out the trash and hang out and we'll see what happens. I was like waiting tables at the time. I was in bands, but like, my idea was to go out and play shows a whole lot. And then ended up over there, and man, one thing led to another. And again, it's just you meet people. You never know what little, interaction or meeting or conversation can lead to really cool things.
Right.
And, even there or even from my band days, I was like in a 3-piece rock band for many years. And some of the interactions I had there, I became part of a community with friends my age. They were making music together. And, a lot of them don't make music anymore, but the ones that do, we still keep in contact and still make music together. So for me, it was about kind of building pathways or meeting people that could, maybe turn into something that could last a long time.
Right. Yeah. And really starting by making friends and then it grows from there naturally.
I would say that's a very important part is having, whether it's a crew or a band or ways to interact with other people outside of yourself at least for me, has been a big part of whatever my success has been on whatever level,
Yeah. Do you remember where like your first like legit tracking session came from? Was it a relationship or
It definitely was. It was probably somebody I had met through my dad's spot at Omni, probably some demo session or, County Q is another place I used to work a lot back in the day,
So coming up around, kind of growing up around a studio and with your dad's company and being able to see these demos made all the time, you had a pretty strong idea about what the process looks like, going into it. But once you dove into it, were there any things that you recognized right away, like, oh, this is something that I really need to work on to be able to remain in this chair long term?
One of the biggest challenges for especially country world stuff where the pace is pretty quick usually is just remembering where you screw up. Uh-huh. That was like the first thing, because it's like you get through the whole song. It's like I knew maybe the second verse, so there was like a thing I missed, or I could have phrased a little differently. Just trying to keep up with your mistakes or the things you would like to improve upon. Mm-hmm. That's still something I struggle with, you know.
Yeah, it's always been amazing to me how we can play through a song, 3 minutes, 4 minutes long, and then at the end of it, right away, everyone knows. And even if they had to wait their turn, three or four musicians in, so they're sitting for like 10 minutes, and then you pull up the talkback, and hey, what do you need? And they know right away. I need the third bar of the second verse, the seventh bar of the chorus.
Yeah,
and they don't forget. Did you find any like strategy for doing that, or was it something you just kind of learned over time?
I just try to, whenever I do, react to like where I'm at in the song. I knew it was somewhere in the turnaround or in the bridge or something. And a lot of times, you have enough time to kind of like, can I just listen to the pre-chorus one more time and see, But the quicker you are at that, the more people will hire you for sure. And just being able to not leave clunkers on a track is so important too. I've been a part of some sessions where maybe they forgot that they screwed up there or whatever, but leaving those clunkers on there is a good way to not get called back again, I would say,
Yeah, definitely important to remember. So as a bass player who's not typically doubling their parts and, doing multiple passes, once you get done, are you like continuing to stay like kind of engaged and listening through just in case you catch something? Or
yes, I mean, I would say it kind of varies on demo sessions. If I think the part's good and it's executed well, then I feel like I've kind of done my thing. Now on records where, it's like I like to listen a lot, really, preferably it's like if I can get through a track, get out of the headphones, go in the control room, get a different perspective on it, that I find that helps me a lot.
Cool. That's awesome. So can you share a little bit for the folks that don't know what your guys' studio process looks like and what sort of clients you're serving and what services you're offering and what that experience looks like for a musician in the studio?
So it's pretty much been a demo or what you would call indie studio for many, many years. I mean, 40, honestly. It's been around for a while. And pretty much clients come to us a lot of times through the internet. Like 15 years ago, we had a lot more like publishing companies. We did a lot of publishing company demos. But since computers have gotten so much better and track guys, whatever you want to call it, have become kind of the norm, especially for just getting a song idea across. We don't see as much publishing demos anymore. It's mainly people a young artist that just needs something recorded to either shop or try to get a band with to get some kind of momentum going. And they'll reach out to us. I'll meet with them, kind of explain to them the way our system works. It's like, if I can understand what they need, then I feel like I can communicate with the band in a way that everybody wins. So as long as I can get on the same page with them, then I know the music can be right. And then we have a great group of engineers, vocal engineers, tracking engineers, mix guys, that we kind of leave it to them. I mean, they can't hire producers to come in or, whoever to help with vocals or any of that other kind of stuff. But most of the time, for the stuff we're doing, just having an honest opinion in the booth really, really helps,
Right. And so when this artist or songwriter comes into you guys to help produce their demo, when you bring that then into the musicians, how much time do you have to like lay down each song?
I would say usually between 30 and 45 minutes. And I think the way we're able to work so efficiently is because, again, I meet with them a half hour, an hour before the session, usually through Zoom or something, and really just try and, if I have ideas or things that I think could make the song more, if we're just trying to release it, then we can kind of make it whatever we want, right? There's less rules. But if we're trying to get a publisher excited about it, or if we're trying to pitch it to someone else, then, we don't need long solos. We don't need long stretches of instrumental breaks, So I try to help people with, well, if we're trying to pitch it, then we should think about, shortening this or moving the solo before the bridge, so that as many P's and Q's, or questions have been answered. And then the guys we hire are really, really good. Top-notch, A-class guys, who play on the records that they hear on the radio anyways. So it's, then it's just a matter of kind of relying on their talents and having a conversation. Once the vibe's kind of set and everybody's kind of digging it, then we just get a track down and then at our parts, and that's kind of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So when you say getting the track down, for the people that haven't been in this Nashville demo experience,
sure.
What does that look like from like when you get in and listen to the work tape until you say, okay, cool, we're done, we're going to move on to the next song?
Sure. So we'll start, the band will come in, I'll pass out the charts, and I've got lots of notes. Anything the client says, I try to remind myself. I go through, I chart a lot of songs during a week. So I'll write down just as many notes or anything they say that I think can help guide us to where we're trying to get, whether it's a little bit slower or it's swampy or it's happy or any of those things that just the band can look at the chart, see my notes, see the chords, listen to the song, and if it's a finger-picked intro or if we need a loop or any of those things, it's like I just kind of say that and then we just kind of move. And there's not a lot of questions from the band, as far as like, what if we try this or if we do this? And, sometimes if we do, some people will book out a whole session and we'll do 3 or 4 songs and we have more time to kind of like get a track down, go in and listen to it, talk about it. But for the most part, it's more about just trying to capture energy, trying to capture the moment, capture the vibe, and just present it in a way that sounds like you would hear it on the radio, pretty much is always the goal.
Gotcha. So the musicians have the opportunity to play the song. How many times would you say before they start doing overdubs?
Well, we'll start, a lot of the times we'll run the chorus first, for example, to make sure that the tempo, whether it's halftime or full time, all those like kind of groove questions, the chorus 1, verse 2, let's just run that. If the vocals are phrasing pretty good, then the tempo is probably right. If the feel's right, then we run the whole track. And they probably get 2 shots per part. So if you're an electric guy and you have 2 parts, you probably have a couple of chances, to run the whole thing. And then, fixes, hopefully, the guys we get are very talented and they don't have a lot of fixes most of the time, but, as many fixes as they need, pretty much, I mean, we want it to get it has to be right. It has to sound good. It has to be correct. And we, there's enough time to address any kind of question marks or, again, kind of areas of the music where maybe they just want to do something a little bit different than what came off, And I'm listening too. I mean, I'll pretty much run the song as many times as anybody else is running it so that I can listen and be engaged and, keep my ear out for things that I think the client might like a little bit better, whether it's an arpeggio or power chords or any of that kind of stuff. So, again, just try and get us to the finish line as good and as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. So for a musician that's coming into that type of environment for the first time, a couple of things that they may have not experienced before if they've had previous recording experience.
Sure.
One is that you got to get it right the first time, every time.
Pretty much, yeah.
And it's okay. There's a little margin for error, but really you got to be able to lay down your first take and it feel like it's pretty much there. Then you can refine from that point.
Totally.
What sort of things do you feel like would be a wise thing for a musician that wants to be able to land in that sort of starting point position to be able to prepare for the ability to go into a session and in 3 hours record 4 to 6 songs that likely are in different styles, and may lean one way or another. What sort of practice or research or education do you think is helpful for someone to be able to execute that well?
A part of being in an ensemble is playing in an ensemble. So if you can get in a band or a weekly gig at a bar or honestly anything. I mean, I grew up playing, every Tuesday night at On the Rocks down to Mumbrian, and you learn, especially with covers too, you learn what people are doing. The cool thing about YouTube now is that you can pull up, usually a video of the band and see the hand positions they're using, and that, all that stuff. It's like speaking a language, it's like you can play music and that's like speaking. But until you really understand, again, like being able to read a chart, being able to read notation, then you can write the language. Then you're really all the way there, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Yeah,
absolutely. So definitely learning charting is a necessity.
Yes,
to be able to get in.
Yeah.
And then the ability, I imagine, to be able to replicate a certain sound based on an influence or the way that something's described.
Yeah, and a lot of that is just having played that type of music before. I mean, whether it's in a church worship service or, again, a bar club date or being in a rock band, it's just like all those things feed your vocabulary the more you do, the better, honestly. Keep an open ear. Listen to things that don't necessarily speak to you creatively. But, I mean, Christmas music. Learn how to play Christmas music, you know?
Right.
Listen to Michael Bublé. Listen to, you know, for me, something like that wouldn't be my, like, obvious go-to. You know, get outside of your comfort zone so that your comfort zone is that much bigger, I guess, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Yeah, just playing it all. It's like, you know, a lot of guys are good enough at just about every style, whether it's jazz or stray cats or Western swing. You know, it's like you have to be able to do your version of that where it's not distracting, you know, where it sounds like it fits. It doesn't have to be the Brent Mason version, you know, but it has to be a version that sounds like it belongs in the track.
Yeah, absolutely. Another aspect of learning languages is learning the language of the artist or the client or songwriter that is calling on you to be able to translate their vision into a song. And as the band leader, you have to be able to communicate what they're saying or what they're trying to describe to the players that you're hiring. But a lot of times the artist or the songwriter doesn't have the same musical knowledge that you have. What are some ways that you've learned how to translate what the artist is saying and make sure that the musicians are understanding it to be able to capture it?
Well, I mean, you know, to me, you have to read body language. You have to, like, a lot of times if they're like air drumming or like, you know, I'll be in the room watching their hands. It's like any kind of clue that can show you maybe, I mean, you know, within a certain type of genre or style, pop or rock or whatever, you know, there's usually like a few things we can try, whether it's a rocked out guitar or a more arpeggiated guitar. You know, it's like you're just trying to distill in a way, again, like you said, somebody who's not technically sound, the experience of having been through enough of those situations and seen other people, how they've reacted and translated, you know, make it more purple is always the favorite one, right?
Right.
You know, but like,
does that mean play it like Prince?
I wish. You know, it's being in the room as a sideman a lot and really watching how other people distill that information. I mean, that's really how I learned how I translate those things between the artist and the players. But, you know, I mean, if they can sing anything, if they can mouth drums, that's usually enough. I mean, or it should be. If you're playing on sessions, you should be able to kind of pick up enough information out of that to then go execute what you need to execute.
Gotcha. So in the case where you're working on songwriter demos, are there cases where the songwriter is bringing you something that isn't really a fully formed piece? Like maybe it's lyrics and maybe they have a general like idea around it, or are you guys only working on stuff where like you have a very clear work tape of the entire arrangement of the song?
It's all kinds. Sometimes the rule I have is that if you can sing it, then I can put chords to it. And, you know, sometimes people are just natural singers and they're good singers a cappella. Sometimes people, you know, they just want to experience it, and that's okay too. So then I just kind of have to work through them, and I'll actually replace their work tape. I'll say, does this sound right to you? And if we agree this feels good and we're going for Kentucky Headhunters or anybody kind of feel, it's like, I know how to get that with the musicians. I know what that means. It's just making sure that the melody and the phrasing kind of match up with where their mind is, you know? And again, some people are incredible singers, but they don't speak a lick of music. So it's just hearing melodies, understanding what notes are in a chord, finding the key. And then, you know, a lot of times I'll literally write out the notes, you know, on this word, it's a 3 note. On this word, you know, I always write numbers. It's a 1 note, you know, and then I'll sing that back to them, singing those notes. And if we agree, then then I know how to get to the next part.
Gotcha. And where did you start to build the skill set to be able to do that?
Honestly, was watching my dad. He showed me, he took me back in his room. We call it arrangements because we are arranging. Like we won't write a melody for people because we're not, especially at the studio I work at, Beaird. We're a recording service. We don't want to own any of your music. We don't want to, you know, have to like keep up with admin or whatever, any of that stuff. This is strictly for hire. we're just going to make this music and leave it up to you and your team or whoever to get it across the finish line. And having him, underline, if you have a lyric sheet, underline where the downbeat is. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's where the downbeat, because sometimes there'll be lyrics going into the downbeat, and then once you have your downbeats kind of marked, then I'll go back and literally just write out the notes that they're singing, again, in numbers, because that's just how my brain is wired now, above them. And then it's pretty easy. Like finding the phrasing, if you can get where the downbeats are, then, if you've been singing at all or making music at all, then the rest of it's pretty much just ear train.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great tip for figuring out where someone's, phrasing as when it's not already presented.
Yeah, and a lot of times they're just kind of like free-form singing, and I kind of have to just like imagine, sit there and think about it. It's like, okay, now where do I think the backbeat is? Okay, if that's the backbeat, then that's the one on this word, and then we kind of just move out from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So another big aspect of this that has been a continual, change over the years is the idea of working remotely. So you mentioned that you have a lot of clients that are coming through, like just finding you guys online, hiring you that way. I'm sure many of which never even come into the studio, right? Are there some workflow ways or communication methods that you've determined to make that interaction successful each time when you don't necessarily have the opportunity to have them there right with you?
Sure. So, usually the meetings I do, if you're out of town or through Zoom, we'll just do a Zoom meeting. And honestly, phone works too. As long as I can hear you, then we're good. But a lot of times it's Zoom. It's nice to see the people and talk to them, And then once we get to the studio, so that's all the pre-production. And then once we get to the studio, we use this plugin called Audio Movers, which is allow them, if they have earbuds or a nice set of headphones, or if they happen to have like a small home studio, they can get our sound mix really, really good. We used to do Skype, and Skype and Zoom both are really good at communicating vocals, voice and speech, but they're terrible at communicating a full, dynamic mix. So we don't really do the video stuff in the studio anymore, because a lot of times the clients would be like, well, I've got the video up, but I'm not hearing anything. So now we just kind of do the audio, and they text me. I tell them, it's like, hey, if there's anything you hear that you think you might want to do differently or that we need to address, just shoot me a text and we'll make sure that we get taken care of. Or just send me a thumbs up. Again, the band is so good, and we kind of have a rotating cast of characters that we know can get, with some certainty to the promised land. You know?
So when you're working through that process, and obviously it's a fast-paced process, you guys are able to execute it in a way that you believe is the right way, or the way to be able to be successful with the vision that the artist has.
Sure.
But there's definitely times where the artist, maybe they aren't really sure what they want, and then they thought they wanted one thing, but then once they hear it that way, they want something else.
Right.
How do you navigate those experiences when you have the instinct from your experience that the way you guys are approaching it is the way that's going to get them where they want, but they're a little bit unsure, and maybe making it a little bit challenging to be able to determine what the right move is? What are some tips on how you communicate with them to keep them happy?
Well, to me, it's just kind of like a list in my mind where it's tempo. You got to get the tempo right. So that's the first thing we think about. And I'm listening the way I think about tempo 99% of the time is, how is it singing? The way the vocals are phrasing, the way the vocals are being delivered, to me dictates the tempo more than anything else. So if it's singing pretty good, they can text me and say, hey, it needs to go a little bit faster, it needs to go a bit slower. Great. I'll say, here's a chorus at 80, here's a chorus at 81, here's a chorus at 82. And I tell them, without thinking about it too much, which one do you like better? It shouldn't be a matter of like, oh, I'm like really thinking about it hard. One should just feel better than the other, And then it's like, well, if say the bridge isn't quite right, or can we try this? And it's like, if the tempo is right and the arrangement's good, then we can, punch in a section as many times as you want, honestly. As long as, again, I feel like I have a good understanding of where we're trying to go. It's like, we don't want to just go in there and just, well, let's try this or that. It's like, I try to, again, if it's any kind of text clue, vocal clue, as far as dreamier, or it needs to be more spacious or heavier, or any of those kind of words, ethereal. It's like, we need to open up, or we need to tighten up, or we got to rock out, or we got to back off. I can say those things to the band, and they can turn on a dime pretty quickly.
So it seems like just a lot of continued communication is
constant.
What keeps them.
Yeah.
And are you asking them questions as you go along to like reaffirm that you're on the right path? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I'm saying, how's it feeling? Are you hearing anything in particular? And, 90% of the time, our clients are very happy with what they're hearing. Again, because I try to answer as many questions about the production before we get into the studio as possible, And a lot of times sometimes they'll be on a click and they know what tempo they want to be at, and that's helpful too. But it's just, again, it's just trying to get inside their head. If I can get inside their head and see where they're seeing, then I feel like I can get there. I've been a part of enough different types of music where I know how to get there.
Absolutely. So let's say Joe, the guitar player, is moving to Nashville, wants to figure out how to get into sessions. He goes online, sees Beaird Music Group, one of the premier demo studios in town, been around for 40 years. This sounds like it would be a great place to cut my teeth and get started. But it's very challenging to be able to jump into that with someone that's brand new to town that hasn't had the experience yet, because you guys got to be moving at a rapid pace. You have to be able to rely on them. And that takes, experience. From your perspective, how do players start to work their way into your system?
So the way that I've, in the past, let's say post-COVID or whatever, we've had probably 2 or 3 guys that I didn't know about, and sometimes they were making a record for somebody else, and they were just like this guy that nobody knew, but the artist really knew they wanted him there. And I met him there. It's for me, I can't get somebody in there that I can't trust, because it's just too much. There's not enough time. So for me, it's, if I was going to tell somebody, hey, if you're thinking about, and it is a good way to cut your teeth because you cover a lot of genres and it's pretty quick, I would tell them to kind of start where I started, which is just playing shows, meeting people. It's Russ Paul told me a long time ago, he said, this isn't a town that you can game, it's all word of mouth. So if you're not out there either at songwriting nights or playing downtown or whatever, if there's no resume to look at, then there's no way to get in. Does that make sense? And, I've played residencies at the Springwater before, which is this dive, it's like, and some of those interactions I had at the Springwater led to my most, for me, my best recording experiences ever, whether it was artist or song or producer or whatever. You just have to kind of get in there and start, be a good hang, make sure you do your homework, make sure you've shedded enough. And then it's just really about just getting in anywhere. Honestly, it's just getting in and playing and developing and just being in the community, I guess, would be the best thing. Find a way to get in the community. Do overdubs at your house. Whatever it takes just to get you meeting, so that if I am on a record and it's like, there's this kid here who I've never seen before and he just slays, when it's like, well, then I know I can call that guy and he can come and do what we do,
So you would say that you typically find those players through playing on a session with them where someone else has brought them in.
Right.
Would there be a case where someone would recommend someone to you if you're in a pinch? And
so sometimes people get sick, say an hour before the session. And then, usually I'll just say the piano player bailed or something. I'll just ask them, it's like, hey, we've gone through all of our guys. Is there anybody else, that you recommend? And I trust those people to tell me people who understand our process, know the gig, people that can hang, Yeah.
Right. The building, being a part of the community and, and building is so important. And it's also a little challenging when you haven't been introduced to that side of the industry yet, because we grow up around traditional jobs where they say, like, go to school, get a degree, get a certification, learn a trade, then apply for a job somewhere, get an entry-level position, work your way up. And so the first thought for a musician, for many musicians, I get calls every week about this. Hey, I'm new to town. I've done this sort of background, whether it's that they just graduated from music school, or they've been playing in bands for a while, and now they're moving to Nashville, and so they start calling studios to get work.
Right.
And time and time again in these conversations that I have with people, their opportunities come from the songwriters. They come from getting around town, playing shows, and then being brought into that environment. For all the reasons that you mentioned, but it's not necessarily obvious. Off the bat. So moving out of the demo world into when we're working on records. In those cases, we have more time. And tell me a little bit about how you're thinking differently when you come into that, and how working on demos helps prepare you to be able to execute in that type of production setting.
Well, it's nice because the biggest constraint in demo world is the time. So again, we cut 6 songs in 3 hours, which is moving pretty quick. A lot of times on records, if it's country records, it's usually 2 or 3 songs a session, usually in 3 hours. So you get about an hour a song, maybe. And then if it's more of the rock stuff, man, you can work on 2 songs a day or 1 song a day, Just always being focused, knowing, when to be quiet, when to let people finish their thoughts before, don't just because you have a million ideas, just start espousing them off. It's like, be cool, focus on your part. And, I've never been afraid to ask questions. Like even on record days, it's like, if I think something's too fast, I'll just say, hey, does it feel too fast? Anybody else? But having that much time and, really pacing yourself, right? So it's like, I get more than 2 chances at this. A lot of the times, on country records too, the demos are so good that you're just kind of copying what they're doing, honestly, and kind of putting your twist on it. Or, some producers want you to pretty much just play the demo, again, because they like the song because it sounds a certain way, right? So being able to listen to a demo and kind of understand what's happening and, making sure that, you have the dynamics right. If for me as a bass player, it's like, if I need to be up here in the intro, then, listen to that and probably start there. Start with the demo and then move out, unless we're trying to build from the ground up. But usually they don't, if they don't want to use anything from the demo, a lot of the times they'll go back to just like a guitar vocal. Let's just get a version of the song down and start fresh. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Because again, a lot of it's, they like the song because it sounds a certain way. It sounds that way. So,
what is your approach on how to communicate with the producer and the artist in the context of communication on a master session? When we think about talking with the artist and the producer, how much are you initiating conversation and ideas and trying to pull information out of them versus like just kind of reading the room and gauging the situation to determine what you're going to do?
If I'm the band leader, quote unquote, on a session, then I'm talking to them a lot. Again, and it's kind of the same thing I'm doing in demo world, where it's like, I'm trying to understand where, what they're hearing in their head. And if I can get there and again, communicate to the band, or, a lot of times I'll have done the charts. It's like, I know that they want this in this section. Whereas if I'm like the side man, if somebody else is leading the session, unless something just like feels very wrong, I usually don't say anything. I usually just try and do a good part and, check in, make sure everybody's happy. But otherwise it's like, I'm not trying to eat up time and eat up, intellectual, reserves, just constantly checking in and questioning and all that stuff. Do your thing. And then a lot of the times if they don't say anything to you, then it's good. And that's good enough, Yeah. So if I'm leading, I'm talking quite a bit. If I'm the side man, then, unless they have something they need to talk to me about, I'm just kind of there to get my part down and make it go as smooth and quickly as possible, even on record days still,
Yeah, right. So when you're the leader on a session, what sort of things are you looking for or listening for in the room to determine when you need to kind of speak up and take your leadership role to help guide things in a good direction?
The difference between like band leading a demo session where the leader is kind of the producer, as opposed to a record where there is a producer, I usually wait for the producer first. And if he's like, the bridge isn't right, then it's like, again, just any kind of clue, whether, again, it needs to be more spacious or it needs to be tighter or whatever, and it's just asking those questions. The band's hearing the answers most of the time. It's like what frustrating thing about being on a session sometimes is when it's not quite right and they like go off a talk back and they're like talking amongst themselves. It's like they're doing all that stuff where it's like, well, it needs to be more like this and like that. And it's like, man, if the band could hear that,
right,
it would be so helpful. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, it's so important. I always leave the talk back on if anyone in the control room is talking. Because otherwise you're looking in there trying to read their lips. Well, you see them moving and then they come, I guess we'll just try it again. It's like, man, if we could have heard even the seemingly non-important things you're saying, these guys are so good where and everybody on the session wants you to be happy. Wants the producer and the artist to be happy, all that conversation stuff is really helpful. It helps us, a lot. Yeah, for sure. So you're asking a lot of questions, and as you're asking those questions, the rest of the band is hearing the answers.
Yeah,
as long as the talkback is on.
That's right.
And everyone's communicating. So then there's really not as much like discussion that has to happen because once they get those answers, you kind of instinctually, know what
it's
to
like
do.
all the questions you had, they've answered.
Mm-hmm.
We know the bridge isn't right. They've talked about it. We've taken vocal cues. We know where to go, or at least something to try. You know what I mean? And different producers are different ways. It's like some people are very musical where they can tell you, hey, do a dotted feel here or a, whatever. And some guys you kind of have to wait for the smoke to clear a little bit. It's a little murkier as far as communication, as far as like getting exactly what they want because they can't communicate an A chord from an A flat chord, but it takes all kinds too, some of my most favorite records have been from, people where it's like, there wasn't a whole lot of technical speak per se, but it is more about capturing the emotion and making sure that's all right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a lot about the traditional kind of Nashville role of the process, and something that you've had experience on as well is the things that are a little bit outside of the more common generalized, Nashville approach. So
Sure.
like I noticed that you played on a few records that our buddy Jakir King produced, like Shawn Mendez and James Bay.
Yeah.
When you're working in that world where maybe the styles are getting a little bit more deep, sonically, or we're going in kind of like different directions, different approach, and then also oftentimes different personnel,
right,
from genre to genre. What do you see differently in that type of environment, and how does that process work?
Well, I mean, speaking of Jakir, he's an incredible engineer. He understands good songs, so he'll spend a long time on a drum sound. Whereas most of the time on country records, it's like they hire the drummer. He kind of has his kit. He kind of does his thing. They don't really swap out kick drums. They don't swap out mics or move stuff around or, troubleshoot a bunch of stuff. Jakir's, he's got a very keen ear for, sounds, how they relate to everything, and if they serve the song. Mm-hmm. So, and it's like more about taking your time. We're not in a hurry. Usually, again, it's a song or two a day, So it's like, well, there's actually more freedom because you can try things. You're not trying to get it done before lunch, Mm-hmm. You can come back after lunch and try more stuff, Sometimes we've gone back and redone songs, It's more about kind of taking your time and again, reading the room, seeing, where he is with the artist. Focusing on that relationship will get you where you need to go.
Absolutely. So maybe the speed and the focus of certain things might change a little bit, but it still comes back to the same intention of being able to read the artist or the producer that you're working with, communicate well,
right,
and then execute it. You just might be able to have more shots at executing it.
Yeah, and making sure that like you're engaged because they may work on a drum part for hours. Making sure you're around, making sure that, that if they need you or if they're struggling, that you're there to offer help. Again, it's like if they don't want it, don't give it to them. But, you never know. It's like sometimes if they're struggling with a verbiage or anything, it's like you can kind of step in and help get the team where we're trying to go, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So when we think about kind of staying engaged, there's also the thought about the faster paced process of recording, where it can be argued that sometimes it's tough to be able to have the same level of creativity without that amount of time, but it's still important to be able to deliver something that really feels and sounds great. Is there anything in your mindset that you try to do to like reset your focus and not get too caught up in like the speed of things to find that balance when you are a little bit more pressured for time?
Well, I mean, again, knowing the genre, knowing the artist, knowing what they've done previously, knowing what's worked before, knowing what they like or have liked before because it's out, you know. Mm-hmm. And having that just kind of is like a baseline for where, you know, you can start. You know, sometimes people like crazy, weird inversions and bass stuff, you know. A lot of times in country world, again, it's like you're just kind of there to like pick your moments and otherwise just lay it down, you know, keep it pretty simple. It also depends on ensemble too, like band size. You know, if there's a 7-piece band on the floor, there's not a whole lot of room because there's licks flying all over the place, right? Mm-hmm. You know, piano's got second verse, steel's in the chorus, you know, guitar solo, all that stuff. A lot of times I feel like on the kind of outside of country world stuff, the band size gets really small. It can be 3 pieces, you know, mm-hmm. and that allows you to really focus on, you know, especially in my chair, how I'm relating to the vocal and the groove and the drums and being the bridge between those things, you know, in a way that's entertaining, that's cool, you mm-hmm. know. You don't want to just, you know, be a dead leg or a wet leg or whatever. It's like you want to move the music forward appropriately, and that can mean anything, really, you know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so keeping focused on that idea of moving the music forward in the best way that you can from your position, your instrument that you're playing. So digging into a little bit more around your instrument, when you hear a song for the first time and you're trying to suss out what your approach is going to be on bass, what are the things that you're listening for, and what indicates where you're going to, or informs where you're going to be starting with your part?
Well, again, if there's a demo, usually the demo is a good place to start. If there's not a demo, then just kind of understanding general dynamics. Usually the verses is going to be more chill than a chorus, you know, whether it's a driving song or a rock song, or, you know, whether you want to sound like Green Day or, you know, Dolly Parton. It's like you have to have at least touched those things to know where to try, mm-hmm. you know, and if that doesn't work, having another option in your back pocket to pivot to quickly, you know, that's also very helpful.
Mm-hmm. Are there any elements within the song itself that you're keying in on to determine what your part is going to be rhythmically?
Yeah, I would say the acoustic guitar is probably the first driver for me. Drums would probably be second, and vocals. If there's a big lick or something, you know, that can be anybody, whoever's playing it. Mm-hmm. But for me, the acoustic or the rhythm guitar really informs where my space is going to be best dealt with, I guess would be the right way to say it.
Gotcha. And obviously it's a case-by-case thing, but do you have any way of kind of figuring out how to like unpack what you're listening for in that rhythm that's going to then inform what you're going to play?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, you know, 90% of the time it's a pretty generalized rhythm, whether it's a dotted feel or like a push feel or 4 on the floor or your typical rock, you know, beat. It's so strange because you know, I've been doing this for 20 years now.
Right. Yeah, it becomes just kind of instinctual.
Yeah,
and then it's very much based on the thing. Like, you know, I could play 3 work tapes for you, and then you could explain this is how I'd approach it. But
totally,
just, you know, I know that just generalizing, you know, it can be a little challenging. But if you think about, so what you mentioned is that you're focusing on either the accent that the rhythm has or just mm-hmm. the general feel that it has, then that's going to indicate where your starting point is. Mm-hmm. Is there something that you hear when you're listening down to something that determines whether or not you're going to like really lock in with that or syncopate with it?
Right.
Like pushing leaning one way or the other?
I mean, typically, you know, the kick drum, if you just stick with the kick drum, you're probably going to be fine. You know, 99% of the time. Now, that's not to say you have to be locked, you know. if it's a little, if it's like a looser feel, if we're going for more of a New Orleans thing, it's like, I know that I can kind of be moving around. I don't need to be so concerned about what the kick drum's doing. Mm-hmm. We can kind of exist in different places, and it still feels good because it's that kind of music, But for me, it really is the dynamic of the acoustic guitar player. I know it sounds crazy, but what his rhythm is doing, because then it's like I feel like I'm the bridge between what he's doing and the drums and the vocal. I feel like I'm kind of in the middle of all those three. Mm-hmm. And if I can get in a good spot there, then it's going to feel really good.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So thinking about tone and specifically, what tools do you use that you feel like have the strongest impact on the tonality of your instrument when you're playing?
It starts with the bass, I would say, whether it's round wounds or flat wounds. If we're going for a more retro vibe or R&B thing or something classic sounding, I guess would be another way to say it. Then I'd probably pick up my P bass with flat wounds or the Guild, the hollow body. If it's more of a rock tune, then I'm probably still going to pick up a P bass, but I might play with a pick and with the tone knob opened up all the way. Mm-hmm. I have a little distortion box that I can kind of blend in a little bit of crunch in the top mids that really makes it speak so that it feels like you're occupying, so that it sounds more finished, I guess would be a good way to say it. Mm-hmm. Thinking about it in terms of what this is going to sound like in a mix is important,
Right. How much do you lean on effects if someone's asking for something like that versus letting them kind of figure out how far to push something later? How far are you committing into a sound when you're tracking?
For the records, right, where it's like a song or two a day, usually what we do is going to be finished. Like they're not going to do a whole lot of stuff in post. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it's just a conversation. It's like, and like for example, on my pedal board, it's like I'll have kind of my gag, and then I have a clean channel that's just like straight off the tuner. So it's like I give them both. You got my thing, and then if you want just the clean thing to completely jack with later, then you've got them both. You know what I mean? And just giving them that option a lot of times, and that's kind of where we're living today. I think in general, a lot of records is having options, because a lot of times they want to take it home, they want to mess with it, they want to kind of build their own version of the arrangement a lot of times too. Mm-hmm.
So are there any particular, when you're using that, are there any particular like other pedals that you really like go to for just getting weird with the bass?
There's this thing called the radical delay, which is it's got a glitch thing where it kind of gets lo-fi. Usually it's about degrading sound than it is anything else. It's like I love the Electro Harmonix bass, the micro synth. It looks very clunky, but it's incredibly versatile as far as being able to pull up sub-octaves, octaves, the guitar tone, square waves, working on the decay and the sustain and all that stuff. It's all very intuitive, so I can make it sound, very affected, or just a little bit of like, what is that kind of crunch in the background there, Mm-hmm. So that's a good one. The radical delay. The SansAmp VT Bass DI is probably my most important pedal. It's got a little kind of amp simulator in it where it goes from let's say full left is like, muffled B15 to full right is like Chris Squire, screaming, no bass at all on the tone, top end, SVT thing. It's usually one of those things. When I was in a pop band for a while, I would definitely use more effects to kind of, make it sound like it wasn't even a bass guitar. But so much of what I do now, it's, the bass guitar itself to me is a timeless sound. A P bass is just timeless. Mm-hmm. And that, works. I would always start there and not even really worry about the pedals so much, ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unless you're asked to, and then you're able to kind of pull out those.
Yeah, I have gags that I know, having been in those bands and knowing how these things interact with each other. I know that I can it's just like having a toolkit or a tool bag, and I can pull out this hammer, I can pull out this screwdriver, whatever I think needs to happen. And, mm-hmm. I'm not too precious about it. It's like, if it works, cool. If they're not digging it, fine, just shut it off, move on. I'm not going to try to argue with somebody about it.
Yeah. Are there any specific gags that you have using delay to like create a part?
I would say it's more kind of working a volume pedal, kind of for more like the swelly stuff, whether it's like doing double stops so I can get like a third or a fifth or a seventh usually, and then just swelling into those and letting these kind of like textures float through, almost as like a rhythmic pad, I guess would be the way I think about it a lot of the times, or something with a really short delay that I can play almost like a banjo, where like I've got my hand muting it and I'm kind of three-finger clawing it, just to kind of give it that kind of bubbly arpeggiator sound,
Nice. That's cool. So on your rig that you bring to the studio, do you what is your signal chain from your bass to what you're giving the engineer?
It's tuner, and then usually the Sans amp, and that's it. And then within that, I can, I've got an OCD, for drive. I've got the micro synth for kind of more gacked out sounding stuff. An EQ, just the Boss EQ pedal, bass EQ. I used to be more into multi effects, having like an H9 or a Line 6 stomp thing or something on there. And I've kind of gotten away from those now because, I just find like if I can't, I understand how these things work. And if I can't get it done with those, then it's probably not, my chair is not what you need to be doing those things. A lot of times you're just doing a version of what the keyboard player is doing anyways, right? So it's, if there's a keyboard player there, it's going to sound like it's supposed to sound, Now for more indie sounding records or where they don't know, they want to try things, then that's where I'll kind of usually use those things typically. But again, most of the time it's just a tuner and that little Sans amp thing.
Gotcha.
That's it.
And are you giving clean and dirty signal all the time, or is that just if you're asked?
Pretty much if I'm asked. When I go to a record, I'll go into my pedal board, out. I've got a little LA610 Universal Audio preamp that I'll give the control room at line level. So they don't have to run it through anything if they don't want. Sometimes I'll run it through like a CL1 or something. Go straight to tape. That's great. And then I'll have an amp. So I've got an effects channel going to my UA thing. I've got pretty much a copy of that going to the amp. So whatever's happening in my world goes to my rig and the amp. And then again, I have that clean channel for sometimes if I am doing something that sounds kind of jacked up, that they can blend the natural tone in later or just get rid of the gag completely, Having a dry tone, if you're going to be doing gaggy stuff, is important, I think.
Right. Gotcha. So you bring your own with your rig. Is there a reason that you like that specific preamp?
Yeah, it's got the tube thing, and I love slow compression. I don't want to hear the compression ever. If that's the vibe, then I would prefer them add that later or do it in there so that I don't have to think about it. Pretty much, I just want it to be a block of sound, in Pro Tools or whatever, kind of monodynamic, because that's typically what the bass needs to be. It needs to, just kind of sit.
So you're adding a bit of compression in your chain also?
Yeah, I'll usually pull 3 dB. If I really dig in, it might hop up to 7 sometimes, but... And
when you say slower, you mean like a slow release? So it's
slow attack, slow release.
Both.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, because a lot of times with the fast attack, you lose the transient. It sounds like it's like pumping or something weird. It almost feels like you got delay compensation on or something. To me, I always want it just to sound transparent. I don't want to hear compression. I want to get the effect of compression without actually hearing it.
Right, for sure. And then when you're running into an amp, that's a question that comes up a lot, in the studio, DI bass versus amp bass versus a combination. Would you say that you like having both of those options all the time? Would you say it's a and or thing depending upon the vibe? When would you lean on a DI for bass versus an amp for bass?
Typically the way I produce my signal, or I come at my signal, is everything they need is coming off my DI. If they need a room, if they need to hear air, then they have the amp. They can use that. That's great. Typically, and again, that's just like a personal taste thing. What I grew up listening to, a lot of it was just DI bass with no amp. So it's like, if I can get that right, then I know that we're in good shape. Now, I did this project a few weeks ago where it's like we weren't on headphones. We were in the room listening to each other and playing. And it's like that at that point in time, I don't know what's going on with the DI. I'm just listening to my amp, you know, but that's typically, that's not the norm.
Right.
You know, usually we're on headphones and we're listening to stuff like that.
Gotcha. So when would you lean on an amp more? Would there be a certain style or a certain reason for it?
More earthy, I guess, more organic, whatever you want to call it, you know, less processed, less slick, less pop, you know.
Gotcha. What kind of amp do you use?
I have a modified Fender Showman that I run through a Mesa Boogie 15-inch speaker.
Nice.
It's kind of its own thing. You know, I've always kind of, for better or for worse, done my own thing when it comes to music, kind of in all facets. I've never owned a B15. I should. You know, I love SVTs. They're probably my favorite amps. I still don't own one. You know, I know what this thing does. I've had success with it. Why am I going to, you know, mess with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So doing your own thing with music brings up a great point about the idea of figuring out how to build a reputation by either like your sonic stamp or your style or something that you're kind of known for, while at the same time being versatile enough to be able to get called on for a lot of different types of sessions so you can keep your calendar full.
Right.
What has your experience been on how to really find your identity within things, but then also not be held back by that identity?
Well, I think it comes down to more of like a kind of a, for lack of a better term, account by account situation, where it's like, I know this guy likes this sort of thing, so I'm going to bring those tricks to the show, you know, or I don't know this guy at all. I'm walking into the situation blind. I'm going to keep it pretty chill, you know, to start with, and then just see what happens. You know, a lot of times if I walk into a session and they're like blasting some like crazy cool music, it's like, all right, I know we can kind of like go for stuff here. Where it's like, again, it's like country record, you play the demo, it's like, usually you can just do that and it's totally fine, you know? Again, I think my experience has been people, every stage of the creation of the song, whether it's the songwriting, the demo, whether there is one or not, the record, you know, you're always building upon what you've come from before or heard before. You know, people think they're done with the song because of the way it sounds when they're done with it. You know, all those pieces add up to a finish line.
Yeah, for sure. So when you're working with a new producer or a new client that you don't have as much information about, or do you ask questions? What do you do to like kind of prepare yourself for a new gig?
If there's any kind of like chatting, I like to know what kind of music they like. Honestly, that's usually a pretty good indicator of where their head's going to be. You know, if it's an artist that has previous records out, I try and go back and listen to, you know, at least some of their records, so that I know what's worked before, and so that I can kind of have an idea of expected. Like, well, if I present this because I know it's worked for them before, then they'll probably be cool with that, and everybody goes home happy again. You know.
Yeah, for sure. So thinking through the idea of navigating a recording session and getting over the finish line to that end point, can you think of any records or songs you've played on or experiences that you've had where you ran into that kind of like roadblock of figuring out how to get there, and then there was some sort of epiphany that occurred that could be helpful in kind of thinking about how those ideas, you know, start to kind of come together?
Usually it just needs to be something inspired sounding more than anything really specific. You know, and a lot of times the way that I've come across those moments is by getting out of the recording for a second and just playing the song, you know, because like to me, it's like I'm in a different headspace where I'm like in the room playing it with people versus like when I've got the headphones on and the red lights on. You know, sometimes taking yourself out of the pressure situation allows you to kind of just relax and listen and really just try and let the song inform where you need to go. You know, a lot of the times, I would say even in the reverse, I've seen more problems come up on records because a musician or somebody was trying to, they had this idea they really love, but the artist doesn't really love it. And that causes the problem of, why can't we figure this out? It's like, man, if the artist asks you to do something, just do that. You know what I mean? Again, fight for it a little bit, but man, don't sit there and argue with it about what you're hearing. You know, trust them, trust that they know what they want, and give that to them. Don't, well, just wait till I get this one thing down, and then after I get that, I'll stack this other thing on top of it, and then you can decide. It's like, no, man, don't waste your breath. Don't waste your time.
Yeah, being okay with not holding on to an idea too closely if it semes like the artist or the producer
let it
really
go. You know what I mean?
And then you can save it for the next thing that
That's
you do.
Right. I mean,
like that
hopefully you like yourself as a musician enough to know that, or you've been in enough situations too where it's like, it takes all kinds. Mm-hmm. And just because where your instinct isn't correct, doesn't mean that it's invalid or that it couldn't work. It's just that it doesn't work in this specific situation. Being able to kind of turn on a dime endlessly is a very good trait to have, I'd say.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. And just because it can feel a little personal, we care so much about the work that
everybody
we do,
cares.
It can be easy without the proper mindset to get caught up in that idea of maybe putting a little bit too much value on an idea when it's your idea that's not really being heard, by everyone else. Instead of just being able to understand, okay, cool, I brought it up, they didn't like it, step away from it, all good. Yeah. I'll put it in my back pocket and try to use it another time.
That's right.
As a band leader, have you found there to be any specific ways that you could communicate with the other players to keep the vibe right, but also like get them off that train or a similar, train where you need to kind of be the coach and pull the team back together a little bit?
I like to ask questions usually. Hey, can we just try this? Usually people don't have a problem trying things. Mm-hmm. And if I look at the artist and they're like, yeah, I love that, then it's like, great. Well, then we don't have to talk about this anymore. Right. You know what I mean? Let's just do that, Yeah. My whole approach to interjecting my ideas or trying to problem solve is always kind of through asking questions. Mm-hmm. How does it feel to sing? Or are you able to get all your words out? Or is it too loud? I mean, it's very simple questions usually garner the best responses, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing how many answers you can get from just those simple, questions like that. Because the artist is also very artistically engaged in it, and it can be challenging for them to even really know how to answer something unless it's posed in that, kind of simpler way.
Music there's endless options at every juncture. It's infinite possibilities. The session musicians that I've found, they work best when they're giving clear direction, and it's not even like do this note, this lick this way. It's like, this is, however you can communicate it, this is the vibe that we're going for.
Yeah.
And then, as a producer or as a band leader too, it's about getting the right guys in the room so that you don't have to hold hands. Everything everybody's doing sounds incredible all the time. It's like, it's so easy when you have a good band, and we're all on the same team and, everybody likes each other. And, that's not always how it is, but all those things, having an environment that's that encourages interaction and all that stuff, all those little things make a big difference on a session, I'd say. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Giving players freedom, I think, when there's a question is very important. Mm-hmm. Asking questions. If the piano player is the most musical dude in the room, hey, man, what would you do? You know what I mean? Because usually they understand maybe better than anybody, the relationship of melody and chord movement, the chord changes. So don't be afraid to ask for help. That's... people want to help, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, that's great advice to be able to just kind of think about the different skill sets of the people in the room. And if you're in a troubling spot, to be able to pull from their knowledge base that can help, inform what your next move is going to be. So in talking about the something sounding too much like a demo, but also the idea that a lot of times people are trying to just recreate the demo with a more, high level kind of, approach to it. It brings to mind the idea of how to stay fresh in this process where, especially in Nashville, but in record production in general, once you've been doing it long enough, you feel pretty confident in your role. There's a pretty refined process. You're really well educated on the different styles of music, the different styles of songs, and you have learned instincts that are kind of guiding you that way where you're not thinking about it as much. Mm-hmm. But then we can fall into a trap of it kind of going through the motions in some ways if the environment allows that to kind of occur. How do you stay fresh and excited about getting up and doing it every day, day after day?
I listen to weird music. I listen to late 70s Japanese pop. I listen to Brazilian pop from the 60s. You know, it's like I lean on a lot of international music that has nothing to do with what happens in this town. Again, it's just kind of like building, it's just learning another thing, another way of saying something. Music is just like a language to me. So it's like anything I can do to make my language or the way I speak cooler, the better, you know. I grew up listening to like Stone Temple Pilots and, you know, Soundgarden and that stuff. So it's like, that's where my heart kind of always has come from. But hearing the way, and for me, the cool thing I like about foreign music is that I don't get distracted by the lyrics. It's like the voice just kind of becomes this other instrument at that point, you know. It's more about melody and phrasing. It's more about just like playing a guitar, for example. And just listening to things that pulled my ear a certain way, you know. Terrible sounding recordings, but it's like but that's correct. It's like they sound so cool because they suck so bad, you know. I mean, yeah, I don't ever try to discount anything. It's like it just has to move me, honestly, you know.
Gotcha. So how has your balance, you know, been between these different roles that you have? You know, you have this very successful studio that you're the band leader of, that you grew up around. You're also doing sessions, you know, outside of there as well. Imagine very busy schedule. Time management is a challenging thing. The more successful that you get, or the more in demand, you know, that you are. What sort of lessons have you learned along the way to find, you know, balance between your time and also to just manage your schedule to be able to show up to every session and opportunity that you have and execute? Yeah,
I think, you know, as even in the very early days, you know, there were some gigs that I would take that I would regret, you know. Learning that it's okay to say no to certain things and setting boundaries for yourself, I think allows me at least to stay fresher more. You know, it's weeks where like I've been working on this project for 3 weeks straight and I haven't really had a break. My brain's about to melt out of my ears, you know. Getting those breaks, stepping away from music, doing anything else, taking a walk, all that stuff allows you to, when you get back in the studio, it's like, okay, this is fun again, you know. Even if it's like a day, if you have a day off, go do something completely unrelated, you know. I mean, obviously I love to shed, I love to play, but I also value my time away from it because I've seen people that some people would say are jaded or, you know, just burnt. They're crispy. They've peaked, now they're coming back down the other side, and, you know, I totally expect, if that's not already happening, that at some point in time, you know, the phone will ring less. So it's important to, you know, just keep yourself fresh so that you're a joy to be around. People want to be around you. They want you in the room.
Right.
Outside of your musical ability, which should be automatic, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So in thinking about this, you know, this career path and the journey and stuff, was there a point where you felt like I've made it, or was there like a threshold that you have that you feel like you see success as? How do you remain fulfilled as you have had this prolific career, had a lot of opportunity to play in a lot of really impactful recordings? Is there, where does your mind fall in that about what success means to you?
Well, I mean, early on, it was like, well, I got to get a Grammy. I got to play on a Grammy record, you know. And I've been part of recordings that have been nominated a few times. None of them have won, and that's cool. For me, it's more about the community. It's more about my brothers and sisters in the trenches with me. You know, I get most of my joy from them, honestly. And as far as like the music goes, it's like I feel like if we came and we saw and we conquered, then that's good enough. I don't ever try to think about it in terms of, well, what is this going to do later? Because again, some of the smallest things end up being the coolest things or the biggest things you've ever been a part of. Nowadays, I don't think about it hardly at all. It's more about just walk in, do a good job, kick ass, and get out of there.
Was there a point in your career where you recognized the importance of focusing more on that and less on the accolades or the perceived idea of what, you know, the successes looked at as?
You know, again, it was kind of just talking to a lot of guys that were maybe like a generation ahead of me, and having heard their stories about, you know, feeling like shit, or like, you know, can't get over this one guy in the A-team call list or whatever, and then sticking with it, and eventually, got their shot and their stuff, all of a sudden they had a good decade where it's like their thing was what everybody wanted.
Right.
Patience is important, I think, and staying true to yourself and not worrying about how to, copying every other player's thing. Mm-hmm. Having a unique voice is important, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that has helped you to stay focused and fulfilled like through that process?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Be myself,
Gotcha.
I always assume that if somebody calls me, it's because they like what I do and they want me there. So it allows me to kind of takes the pressure off a little bit as far as like trying to like overcompensate or something,
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice, because it can be in certain cases where it's maybe someone that you haven't worked with before that you really look up to, or you're just if you're in like a creative mode where you're just maybe not feeling like your best self.
Sure. Right.
And you're rolling into the session that day. And such a great way to remind yourself to get in that headspace of being excited and confident walking in is that there's a reason that they called me here.
Yep. And just be yourself. Again, don't be an idiot. If you're an idiot, maybe be somebody else. But
Miles.
Oh boy.
Awesome, man. So if the folks that are here that want to be sitting in the chair that you're in every day playing on records and stuff, what would you tell them that you wish somebody would have told you when you were starting that you think might give them a little bit of a head start on figuring this stuff out?
I mean, as far as like being a session player, I'd say at minimum expect a 5-year kind of you hit something starts kind of happening, take your time, be patient, and just, again, get in camps. Even if you get canned from the camps, you'll meet, for me, it's like I'll meet a singer, or I'll meet a drummer, and he'll call me for a gig. And it's like, man, you just never know what tiny interaction is going to lead to something else. Everything leads somewhere, just try and create as many opportunities to meet people and to succeed as possible, I guess. You don't know what crappy gig at the end is going to turn into, a UK tour or something.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like you just don't. And that's another thing I would say is don't, just because you're doing a small gig, don't treat it like a small gig. You know what I mean? Come in prepared. Come in and rock faces. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's great advice. I think the patience part is a challenge, and especially when you're young and hungry, and you're moving to the town like Nashville or LA, then you're like, I'm diving into this and I'm going to take over, because you're excited and you're passionate about what you're doing. And then you start to realize, wow, this really is going to take several years of grinding it out.
Oh yeah.
Before that big break happens for most of the, the people. And then you're reaching that period of time, and then you're like, well, is it going to happen? Is it going to, and it's pretty wild how like it almost like does, as long as you don't quit and you stay focused and you're a good hang and, you check all the boxes.
Right.
It's amazing how like that period of time it seems like that's just, the amount of time it takes, for it to happen. But you really got to stick with it and believe that, we're fortunate enough to have found what we love in life and that we can feel fulfilled in. And we just have to be willing to hang on, long enough to get there, while making sure that every opportunity that you have along the way, you're grateful for.
Absolutely.
And treating it like it's the biggest gig of your life in order to.
Absolutely. I mean, remember, for me, it's like, there's very few sessions, if at all anymore, where it's like, I'm not hanging out with my homies and we're jamming, it's like, that's incredible. I never try to lose sight of that.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of other gigs, and this is, I'm very thankful to be where I am.
Right. It's awesome. Well, we're grateful to have you on the show. Thank you so much for coming and hanging and giving us your time and insight and knowledge. And thank you.
You're very welcome.